Hi, my name is Snelihle Maphumulo. I come from Durban, KZN, born and raised there. I am a conceptual artist here at Rose University, majoring in sculpture. I am currently working towards my year-end exhibition for my fourth year, writing my thesis as well. Part of my art journey has changed quite a bit from high school. I found myself having a breakthrough last year with the type of material that I like to work with. I went from loving painting, working with canvases, printmaking, and I went towards sculpture last year. And so that's where I got my breakthrough, and currently my artistic journey is working towards sculpture, making things, breaking things, and yeah. There aren't really any movements that I'm into right now. I just like making art and creating art, questioning things through my artwork, as it is quite conceptual itself. Zigode Omkhulu was inspired by this idea of space, how some genders are not allowed in specific spaces. For instance, in the Zulu culture, my culture, women are not allowed in the kraal, where the animals are kept, specifically for ceremonies, if there's any important ceremonies that are going to be done. So I looked at this idea of how space acts as a limitation for women. In my culture, I looked at the intersectionality of gender. And so Zigode Omkhulu basically sums up this whole idea of space and breaks down the kraal into multiple pieces that represent how the kraal itself is done by men. And so as a Zulu woman myself, I broke it down with my own hands. I fetched a bunch of sticks and bark, and I created this body of work that was speaking to space, that was speaking to women, and how women are only allowed to access the kraal with their voice. So the inspiration behind the work was definitely women. So being a part of that group of women that was not allowed in the kraal, I was questioning it. I was asking, why are we not allowed? Why is it only men that are allowed in there? So I took some pictures before and after of that space where it wasn't occupied at first by women, and then at second, by men, and then at second it was occupied by men. And it was quite interesting to me to see that negative and positive side of it. And so I took that kraal, the inspiration from that kraal, and I broke it down to basically show my way of thinking, my conceptual way of thinking about the work. And I broke it down into 100 pieces, and I just went with it, and I kept making and making more until it was 100. Coming from a family that is quite modern, not quite into ceremonial things in my tradition, I grew up in a family where there was no sacrifices the entire time of my childhood. And coming into this era where I was now introduced to these rituals, introduced to the ceremonies, I was questioning a lot of things, which speaks to part of the significance of the work, and me kind of having a lot of questions in my head as to why things are done. And obviously with respect, because I'm not the first Zulu woman to question these things, and I'm not certainly the first artist to question such things. So I worked towards trying my best to conceptually and visually present my thoughts and present my questions in this body of work. The materiality of it is really just inspired by the literal space of the craw. It is inspired by the making and breaking of things. It's inspired by me being able to interact with my work, with my body, and not being able to being restricted from it. So I really loved this idea of being hands-on with my work, working, cutting, breaking things, and which also brings to the idea of speaks to the idea of the significance of it. Zigode Omkhulu touches on intersectionality and identity. Identity, speaking to my personal identity, how I had to find myself through my culture. As I've said before, that I wasn't exposed to ceremonies, to rituals in the Zulu culture, and that only came later in my stage of being in the Zulu culture. So I speak a lot on my identity in this body of work, how I had a lot of questions as to where I stand as a young woman in the Zulu culture. Obviously that also comes with a lot of responsibilities, and so I found myself answering some of the questions that were pertaining to my identity in this body of work. And the intersectionality of this work kind of touches on this idea of working with male and woman, patriarchy and matriarchy, how gender can be limiting, how gender can be also opening doors for you in the culture. As a young woman, I experienced a lot of pressure on my identity growing up, specifically in the society that I grew up in and the family that I was growing up in, as well as my academic society. And so society does come with its own pressure of identity and what one must, how they should present themselves. So I found myself having to now understand myself in a different context, and that context being my art, my identity of art. And it intertwined with a lot of questions that I had artistically, conceptually, and I was able to find my way through it. I was able to kind of really sit down with myself and ask myself, why am I feeling this? How am I feeling this? Where does it come from? And most of them were actually from the society. So I think there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. And so I found myself through my work visually presenting my identity and visually presenting my identity through the questions that I had in my head. My intentions for people when they look at this body of work is to firstly have an open mind as to how this body of work speaks to culture, tradition, intersectionality, gender, identity. So yeah, I think people should definitely have an open mind and really engage with each piece of the crosses, I call them crosses, and try to also engage with the body of work as a form, as one body of work, and balance it out as I try to also make each piece of the crosses, or all the pieces, speak differently, as they all have different sizes. And yeah, so I would like people to have an open mind. Yeah. And in terms of emotions, I would like people, I don't know, it's quite evoking as a body of work for me. And I know that as people, we all have different perspectives, but as one stands and kind of takes time to look at the body of work, I think the emotions will kind of change. But yeah, I think maybe people should also be just open-minded and receive the body of work as it is and let it speak to you in terms of what you have in your head.